Welcome to World Unity Week, 28th of June, the final day of World Unity Week, with the theme A New Beginning. And it is my pleasure, I'm Hasina from the Hague Center. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers, Dr. Rika Viljoen and Dr. Vusi Fulakati. They are fellow South Africans, and they just have a long list of credentials. So I'm going to introduce them properly. Dr. Vusi Fulakati is an African consciousness and leadership development scholar and practitioner. He's passionate about the intersections between identity, locatedness, or positionality, and context in the facilitation and embodiment of African spiritual consciousness, values, and practices within organizations. He is an author and the co-editor of the book on African leadership, The Time Is Now. Dr. Rika Viljoen is an international inclusivity, leadership, and spirituality scholar, author, and systems practitioner. Her work explores how story, identity, belonging, and dialogue create the conditions for healing, regeneration, and peace across cultures and generations. She is the co-editor of African Leadership, The Time Is Now. Through her work, she tells the untold stories. And what a great point to begin, because this session is called Sitting Under the Baobab Tree. And over to you, Rika and Vusi. Let me unmute. There we go.
Thank you. Good morning, good evening, whatever the time zone is where you sit today with us under our imaginary Baobab tree. We welcome you all here. On African soil, I believe, as in most other old ways, there are trees and communities go and sit in Africa around a Baobab tree. That's the place where the old people come, the elders, and they share their stories and wisdoms. And when new faces are introduced, conversations happen and decisions are made. And tonight we have such a Baobab conversation. I welcome all of you here and thank you also for the organizers that created the container. In the psychoanalytical world, we know how important the container is, and I guess the old people knew it, the elder people, the first people have knew it before we even considered it. So I guess some of the conversation between me and Vusi, and then hopefully between all of you, can extend to a bit of remembering. Remembering, and maybe if I could spell or write it out tonight, it will be re in small caps and member in large cap. The members that come together and remember. And there are lots of stories in Africa, proverbs and tellings, that Vusi we also shared in this co-creation that I hope can tell some of the oral histories and explain a little bit of the unique understanding of what African soil, this, or must I say her soil, is offering. So I guess I would like to start this conversation or exploration or reflection on one or two of the proverbs that were told from generation to generation here in Africa. And the one is from Tanzania, in the western part of Africa, where they say that one person cannot surround a baobab. Baobabs grew extremely large. A whole community is needed. So thank you tonight for forming that community with us. here. Then from West Africa, there's another saying that if you push a good man up a tree, he will bring fruit for everybody. And hopefully this week also brought you some fruit to continue and some sustenance, something to feed you moving forward. Lucy, maybe if I start with a question to you and then we see where this conversation takes itself, is I wonder what your invitation will be for the people here in the room from Africa to come and sit with us here under the tree that Hasina also created for us here. Thanks, Hasina.
Thank you, Rika. Thank you. It's always a beautiful thing for me to get into a space of storytelling and being with one another. In a world that's so fast-paced, there isn't enough time to pause and be and talk about story. One of the popular things that has often been said loosely, it's the idea that time is different in Africa. And loosely, when people say you're late, they'll say, "Oh, it's African time." And yet, I think if you dig deeper into that story, there is the idea that the time is now for Africa, but also time is an important ingredient of creating reality in Africa. People come before time, and stories come before the clock. And oftentimes, because there's such an attentiveness to people in the way that we tell stories in Africa, you would find yourself lost in the narratives, holding the people, and even lose the rhythm of time. And that, in one sense, is the way that there's an importance of value in beginning with the stories that create community. There are moments when you walk into a village. I worked in a village out of Pretoria, and I did a very, very, very silly thing to call it now. As a fresh out of college, I go to that community. I had been sent to do some work with the community. And I said to them, I have planned for 2 hours and I'll be here just for 2 hours. And then I need to rush to the next community for another project that I have to rush to. So I get in, I do what I needed to do, and I get into my car, and then I leave. And the whole of the following week, I had to manage a crisis because I didn't sit under the tree with the elders of that community. And the elders of that community, while I was busy facilitating, they were cooking a meal for me as the guest. And so all the food that was cooked and prepared for days for the guest that was coming, I had no consciousness of the way that they had gone so many days before I even arrived there to prepare for the event. Only for me, it was a 2 hour set time. And for them, it was a whole planning and expectation and disappointment because I had not honored their story and understood where they were and understood who they are. And that was one of the most deepest lessons I learned early in my career, that listen to the story before you get into all the other pieces of the work that you may do together. So yes, indeed, the time to sit and eat and hear and tell stories. Those stories sometimes can be the things that change the world deeper in reality. I hope that opens a story around the whole big baobab, that no one can ever hug a baobab. But in the African continent, there is so many of them. If you drive and you see these baobab trees and you just have to admire and think about the fact that how many years did it take for that tree to mature, and the layeredness of the tree itself, that it has layers of generations, leaves that were broken, branches that were broken, new shoots that have come through, but a beautiful, beautiful story of a community around that tree. So that's often how I think about the story of Africa. But I think, Rika, you've also traveled into many other parts of the continent. Um, how has storytelling and community for you been an important part of that journey? I know most villages, when they tell stories, they sit under trees. If it's a chieftaincy, they would sit under the tree. And the wisdom that comes out of that moment in resolving community affairs, even if the time they take is longer than you would take in a boardroom, but the wisdom and the connections and the historical narratives that emerge out of that are deep. So I wonder, in the villages you've set and in the places where, how does that look like to sit in the village and sit in a boardroom? Because you've done all of them, and think about storytelling.
Woes, that is a it's not a difficult question. It can be a long answer. Let me state it that way. I was smiling that you started about the construct of time. And I remembered, and I didn't think of telling that if you did not brought the concept of a corporate boardroom on the table, of where I missed the construct of time around the boardroom, with a table in between us, which creates the division, and people sit exactly in the same power seat, and we can interpret the way people sit and dress. In Mali, West Africa, I did research with quite famous instruments on well-being and sustainability. Actually, it was mining, and it resulted in behavior-based safety. One of the constructs had to do with I work to have off, and time flies. That group that was, let me think about it, French-speaking, Bambara oral history, not a written history, communist, Muslim, studied in Russia for their studies, and then it was English with that on top. I couldn't comprehend those constructs of time. First of all, when I could sit, and they at first didn't allow me to speak because I was a woman. Secondly, what they said in day one, what I worked with a group in day one with, they dealt with day two, and day two on day three, only to realize they have a tea circle on the retreat at night, where the conversations and shared decisions are taken as to how the very next day tackle a thing. So I was so ambitious, I guess. In the previous conversation, we hear about doing and being. My doing was overwhelmed my being. So I thought, okay, I will just go to the tea circle. I couldn't, because it was men that sat there. I had to work the rhythm of collectivism. So do thing one day, wait for it. The next day, the group will take it there if they believed and agreed. So in short, they didn't believe time fly. They don't live to have off. They don't work to have off. They work to live, which is a fundamental shift in the ontology, the way in which knowing is created. They also, another person once told me, it was in, I'm not sure, the north of Tanzania, that told me that, no, this was in Botswana, sorry, Botswana, that told me that he could see that a lion walked here. And I asked him, how can he see the lion walk there? Because it was rock. and there were not droppings or marks in the sand. It was rock. And he said to me, "Time bends for me," which also was an interesting response, really, for me. So there's definitely something about time and the time that it takes to have shared understanding because something happened. And then I guess when you said it takes long, I wonder about that, Busi. I wonder about um, that African saying that said, if you want to walk fast, walk alone. And if you want to walk far, walk together. So there's something in the togetherness and the shared construct that's created um, for me in terms of those conversations that we all as a community or a group then later, if I translate it back to corporate, a team, how we then can go out and do what needs to be done with the different parts and pieces of knowing or the fabrics of the complexity of diversity that we all hold and how we can weave that together in an Africa, a knowing, in a knowing. So Vusi, I wonder why and what positionality means for you in your understanding of Africanness.
It's a number of things. And I know this because I've walked along many paths and many people. And my story has been touched by different lenses and different stories. I've had to weave through a number of places. I've had to try and figure out what does it mean to learn and read and act and move and be in Africa. And Africa has a number of kind of timelines that play out one's positionality. You could find in the same place that I could read Africa um, as a tourist myself, even being African, that I want to take pictures and vignettes and moments, but I don't necessarily want to get into the depth of the story. But I think positionality for me has grown to mean a number of things. It means that I honor the time where I stand. I tell a story of where I've come from. I tell a story of not only when was I born, the date, but when was that moment that I became aware of where I stood, and go back into the moments when I was born in a small village. And what does it mean to be born in that village and not in Silicon Valley or in Accra or in Berlin? What does it mean for me to be born in that village? The stories that shaped my life. I I have an image of my grandfather. He had a bench that was under a tree, and the Keglebaya was just behind that. After every long day's work, he would come back and sit on that bench. And somehow he had stories to tell. And then later on, when I then was doing my research, I had to go back and re-listen to my grandfather's stories about belonging. And I would sit in that moment with my grandfather, and a neighbor would pass. And as a neighbor passed, they didn't have to ask for permission to come in. They would just greet and say, Sawubona, Sanbona, I see you. And as they say, I see you, my grandfather would then signal to my grandmother, we have a guest. And I don't know where there was always something to eat for the guest. When was the food cooked? But there would always be some fruit or some food or something. And and the idea that was around that was not a story about a collective existence, a common belonging. It was a real experience of being with people. What does it mean to have people as a guest and be a guest in other people's houses? And what does it mean to understand the village as an ecosystem that if during the planting season there would be a language that would be spoken amongst the village that if we do planting, we will start with the Vilagati household, we'll give a week there, and then we move to the Dlamini, we will move to the Filiun as the third one, we will move to the Patel as the fourth. But there's a rhythm that we will use the same, we call it Litsima, the group of men and women work parties that come and say, this work party will start with you and with you, with you, with you. So when I then came to study African consciousness and African spirituality, the first textbook I had was The Village, and my grandfather and my grandmother and the neighbors that asked me by name. To this day, there's people that when you greet in some of the villages, they would ask you, where is your umbilical cord buried? It's a foreign thing. I'm in a Western mindset to think about your umbilical cord. It goes into a dustbin, doesn't it? But that is a signifier of, as far as you can go back, where can you trace your origins? And what does that story mean about you? And what are the values that you have inherited? And how do those values shape how you shape your humanity with other people? Then I have come to be in spaces and discover that that same humanity, and I talk to Rika, I talk to many other of my colleagues, and then I realize there's something deep about stories in every culture, in almost every part of the world. And the things that make us human are more than the things that separate us. The things that connect us are more than the things that make us look different. I've come to the place where I have come to deeply know that while I may stand in any moment as a Black male, there's so many connections I have with my sisters from other parts of the world and the stories that have shaped their lives and the values that have shaped their lives. There's so many interconnections. And that for me is true in the real sense. I'm Rika. I've 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 lived with Rika in Johannesburg for the past so many years, crossing paths, eating together, writing together, learning together, and all sorts of journeys that we've taken. So that for me is the layers of how you've come to this place where you are and the stories that have shaped it and the values that have shaped it and how does that influence how you see the world. It will be interesting to hear how you see the world, Rika.
I want to ask something before, if you will
Yes.
allow me.
Yeah.
You are from Swaziland, right?
Yes.
Okay. In your way of growing up there, did you have a tribal name? I never asked you this before.
Yes, there is one tribe in Swaziland. So but you would have a clan. So
Yeah, yeah.
so the clan name is um Ompepetwa, the Vilagatis, and there's a river in the lower parts of in the top of Natal and in the lower parts of Swaziland. It's called Ngwavuma River, just up Pongola. And that river seems that when we trace some of the grandfathers, so when my clan names and totems and clan praises are said, they start by saying, you of that river, from that crisp of that river. And that's a story that says when our ancestors moved from parts of the north down towards the south, we don't know so sure how far north into Africa, but as they moved, they then settled there. Some moved deeper into Natal, and some remained there. And in that cluster, then there was then the places where my ancestors became. Interestingly, then there is also that as they moved, they might have taken different surnames. First names, some of them became surnames. So there are particular surnames that in my culture I can't marry because they belong to an ancestry that we share.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you that just before answering
Mm,
what you said, because I guess one of the hurts that white people in South Africa holds is the loss of that ancestry. Or if I speak about me, I don't know. And I find it so rich if a person can say, I was born of this person, of that person, of that person, of that person, and from that river, right? I wish I
yeah.
could. I can't. So, in telling my part of the version of what in your world my identity positionality really have become, I guess that it's Africa and it was Ghana that gave me a sense of being African. And it was a prince in Zimbabwe that one day when I was like, sorry for white men's terrible crimes, and I was very much like, I take full responsibility for what my ancestors did. And he told me, you are you, and I declare you African today, and I make you part of the Ndlovu tribe, which is the elephant tribe.
Elephant.
Yeah, so I'm proudly an elephant and very proud of the spirit animal of that tribe. Um, but the hurt, and I think it's the intergenerational trauma that also Africa presents and holds. From whether it was apartheid, whether it was colonialism, whether it was slavery, um, those collective traumas that we somehow haven't or have maybe spoken about around a tree, but may need more speaking about before remembering really can start, also become important. I'm so concerned that that one average out the oneness, so or rather the we-ness. That's maybe a better way of saying we are so we that we are so equal that in that I cannot bring my part of the piece into this and also be in a way. Africa invites you into that space if you come with humility. And also to your previous question, Vusi, you said something about doing the being part first or the relational part first or the story first. And I remember the Ghanaian people with a very clever mind, impacted by British humor as well, right? There's this clever, uh, cynical disposition said to me, are just respected in a place as the size of your feet.
Mm.
Come with big feet, you will not be, if you come with ego, maybe you will not be acknowledged. Or another group where somewhere in Zimbabwe, where a person came with, I'm this person, I'm this, I'm blah, 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 blah. And the person tell him, in my culture, you would be a monkey and your tail can trip you. You know, there's that humanity and humor that I think is brought as well. Yeah, when you spoke about our interface, Vusi, what I
Yes.
always appreciated for you, and this was at the business school where we worked together, Henley Business School in South Africa, where the way that you can cross boundaries towards other realities and bring healing in that way, I always found phenomenal. So by also hearing my story or another person in South Africa, we still define color institutionally on forms. I need to say on a form, this is my race, because we try and rewire things in a different way. Whether I like to associate with the skin color, I have no choice. I'm forced. But somehow with the way in which you do things, we see you bring that to the table in a very non-threatening manner. How do you deal with a person like me sitting next to you, Lucy, that found another way? My story was a book, an academic book, and yours maybe have been that village where you heard roots.
Now that you're making me think into that, Eureka, there's a beauty. I want to pick up on the one other thing that you've alluded to, the intergenerational trauma. I think we wrote some work around that in some African countries and other parts of the world, as it were. The way in which not every African and in South Africa, South African black or white person can trace their generational roots. And I've been on both sides of people trying to trace their stories. And I've had those that can trace their roots way into across the ocean into particular villages in Scotland, and some that would trace their roots and generations and say, I've lived in this same house here in Johannesburg that my great grandfather lived. And they have generations of that. And for me, part of the wisdom of that moment is to hold that person's story side by side with the person whose surname was changed because the person they worked for as a gardener couldn't pronounce their name and their surname. And then they were given a particular surname. And then when they have children, the children then start asking, what was our original surname? So there would be those people that, through the transactions that would have happened with apartheid, are still searching for a home in their own hearts and in their minds and a naming of that home. On the other side, there would still be people that would say, I also, in this culture, have never really known how to own the space. There's a retired colleague that used to say, we struggle with the keyhole syndrome because fear makes us difficult. We look at each other through the keyhole because we are afraid of opening the door and having the stories. And in realizing that we can open the door and tell the stories, we realize that even our skin color can become a source of healing for the other person. For me, I need your white skin color to remind me of all of the past angers of Black people and then begin to think deeply into, but I am with the person in front of me. Who is she? Who is Rika? What's her story? Then the color dissipates, and then I see a sister and somebody that I know. And then she can look through my skin, and when she was taught to fear Black people, and she can say, but there's Vusi, and I know Vusi. I know I know him as a brother. And that becomes a taking of my hand into spaces that we have never been together. And for me, that's literally what has happened with our relationship over time. We've walked into the corners of the countries and sat with people from many parts. I remember there was a time we sat with a group from Canada, a business school in Canada, and we took them into the heart of Soweto, scared and everything, but because we could do those immersive kind of experiences. I remember when we did an immersion with one group into the apartheid museum and the stories that came out of that story, and some of them very deeply emotional stories. I've struggled to sleep for the past 3 days because I heard that we will go to the apartheid museum and I didn't know how I would feel. And then those that would come out of the same space and say, my parents' anger comes back, and I think I'm angry again. And then the people that would ask, where does that story go when we move from here back into the boardroom and into that? Is there a possibility of a different humanity? So for me, more than anything, to answer the question simply, it is holding the space in between without diminishing any side of the story, and saying to these people as best as you can, I see you and I see you. And in this space, is it possible for us to see each other and feel together and hold the space together for being in this space as human beings more than anything else? And as I tell my story, you discover something of your humanity. And as you tell me your story, I discover something of my humanity. And I'm richer because I have dared to not look through the keyhole and open the door and see and feel and be with another.
Lovely said. You bring a memory, Vusi, about a white executive on that immersion that you spoke about. That was to the Apartheid Museum. And then, maybe if I explain to the people around the tree, there are still two um, routes in America that you can find in. And the one is for white people, and the other one, it splits you already in the beginning, like it was not so many years ago in our very country here. And that mere fact that you get a ticket and it takes you either the privileged way or another way is problematic with the emotions that it creates. So at the end, this extremely arrogant and well-achieving executive in one of the banks here, International Bank, he said that visit to Soweto, which is the township, the only place in the world where more than one Peace Prize, Nobel Prize winner have grown up. It was Tutu and Madiba in one
Madiba.
street. Yes, Nelson Mandela in one street from each other in the same village or the same space then. He said, somehow sugar in Soweto tastes sweeter than sugar in Sandton, which is the richest area in Africa then per square square meter. It was really, and that one saying just gave me so much hope that one can make a difference. And maybe I would like to add one more conversation in this construct. When another day, it was in 2016, and it had to do with impacting change on a country level, right? Or a geopolitical level. And the conversation has been with a person, an elder, that taught me a lot, Dr. Rampeli Mampele, that was the wife of Steve Biko. That's widely acknowledged as one of the fathers of the Black consciousness movement, if not the father of it. And it was a group of about 15 people that sat around a boardroom. It wasn't a boardroom, a table, and they spoke about impacting South Africa per se and doing things differently. And one of the more senior people stood up and says, no, we are not enough. We cannot get it done. And Dr. Rampeli stood up and she said, if I wasn't one of the 15 people that sat in a garage without money, not being able to eat, and we spoke about doing things in a more peaceful way in this country and saying what we need to do, even if we have to die for it, I also wouldn't have believed it. And that was what they spoke about led to what happened in South Africa. It was a Sharpeville event. That was a young boy died, and the scholars also started to protest. That started off peacefully, and it didn't turn out that way at the end. But roughly seen, that was also the event that led to the freedom at the end of Madiba and then the end of apartheid. So one can tie that conversation in a way back, in most ways, back to the end of that. I do believe we are more than 15 people here tonight. If we, or today, this morning, I don't know what's your time zone, if we decide we would like to do things differently. But I guess for me, there's something in the doing as well, not only the philosophizing or the conversation. So maybe the question that I would like to ask you, Vusen, you can take this conversation wherever you like, is I wonder what will happen if I start to show up differently. How will it change the relationship? If I do the work on me and I show up differently. So maybe it's I work. Mm.
Mm. So let me preface that with dealing with the perhaps a misconception that African values